Hey everyone, Jeremy Teletone. We are just a few days away from releasing the final instrument in our synth trilogy that we started a few years ago. We've been calling it, internally our Gaspard de la nuit trilogy. The final instrument in the series is called Le Gibet, and like its siblings, it is based on a movement from a piano suite by Maurice Ravel. We wanted to take a minute to explain how these three instruments are alike and how they're different. And when we're explaining them, I'll probably explain them in the order of the movements of the piano trilogy, not the order that we released them in. And as I was making the outline for this video, I was thinking about how this kind of reminds me a little bit of one of my favorite movies. David Lynch's Inland Empire is a movie that is about the making of a movie that is based on a play, and a play that is based on, as we find out a little bit later in the movie, a cursed fairy tale. And this series that we are doing is based on a piano suite by Maurice Ravel, which was based on a collection of poems. And inside those poems, the author describes this fictitious story about how he acquired these poems, which was basically him meeting a strange man on a park bench who ends up being the devil. And these poems are basically cursed. This kind of feels like that, like we're going deeper into another movie reference, like deeper into the Inception levels or whatever. But let's talk about the piano music first. Gaspard de la nuit was a piano suite that Maurice Ravel wrote in 1908. I believe its first performance was the following year in 1909. There are three movements: Ondine, Le Gibet, and Scarbo. Ondine is a movement that kind of describes, it's this very, underwater scene. There's this water fairy, water spirit that lures men into the bottom of the lake where they drown. The piece is very haunting. It's beautiful. It's eerie, but the whole thing kind of just sounds like floating. The second movement, Le Gibet, describes a scene where a man is kind of looking out through the desert. He sees a man hanging from the gallows. It's being burnt by the sun, and in the distance he hears a bell toll from a nearby city. The third movement, Scarbo, describes a scene where the author is laying in bed and seeing this demon goblin character tormenting him and taunting him from the shadows of his room. Kind of a frightening scene. So with our instruments, going back to Ondine, we kind of made this an instrument that does have, even though the story, being pulled to the bottom of a lake and drown is not a light subject, we were focusing kind of more on the hypnotic side of the story and the aquatic water side of the story. And so these are sounds that are a little bit lighter. They kind of float. There's some dark stuff in there too. We used a lot of effects like phaser and chorus to kind of help create that more hypnotic side to the instrument. It has 50 presets, 25 multis, and like the other instruments in this trilogy, most of the sound is controlled by two knobs and one slider. The mood knob controls a series of effects. It's going to be different for every preset, but like I said, we leaned a lot on flanger, chorus, a little bit of phaser. The movement knob is going to do what you would think it would do. It controls most of the movement that's happening, and the modulation slider is a little bit of a wild card. It's going to do something different on a lot of the presets. More often than not, it's going to be some kind of low-pass filter. Sometimes it's a high-pass filter. Sometimes it changes the rhythm of the movement. Sometimes it introduces noise. But there'll be a little bit of a surprise on every preset for all these instruments, because you don't know exactly what you're going to get when you turn those knobs up or down, or when you move the modulation slider. And amongst ourselves, we've always called these synthesizers because we weren't really setting out to make the most comprehensive, complex synthesizer ever made. We were kind of trying to do the opposite, which is take, most of the controls of a synthesizer, tuck them under the hood, and then attach the majority of those controls to just a few knobs, so you can have a lot of control over the sound with just a couple of movements of a couple of different knobs. The second movement of the piano trilogy, and the final movement that we are about to release in our trilogy, is called Le Gibet. And this is an instrument that we pushed very dark. I would say this covers like the dark, brooding side of the synth spectrum. For the effects, we used a lot of saturation, distortion. We were pretty sure, well, we knew that this was going to be the final instrument in this trilogy. And so we kind of left it all on the table. We put everything we had into this, every idea, you know, we could muster. It actually has more presets than the other two. This has 70 presets and 30 multis, because like I said, we just wanted to really end strong with something that was, you know, bigger, darker, more movement, because it's kind of more of everything in the final piece of this trilogy. And the final movement of the piano suite is Scarbo, which was actually the first instrument that we released. And I will be honest with you that when we made Scarbo, it was an experiment that we weren't sure if anyone would really enjoy that type of instrument. At that point, we had only released one other instrument, postcard piano, so we didn't know how it would do. Not to mention, I could not fathom releasing an instrument that, because of the way that it's spelled, that we would have an instrument that people would call Gibet. But, you know, eventually, like, you guys really do seem to like this series, and so we decided we did want to continue with it. We did Ondine second, and then Gibet is the one that's about to come out. Anyway, Scarbo, the sound of it is, I would say, more pointed, technical, dark, haunting. There's some very melancholy stuff in there too. But yeah, so to recap, Ondine is kind of lighter, more hypnotic, uses a lot of flanger chorus type effects. Gibet is dark and brooding. We use a lot of saturation, distortion, some phaser too. And then with Scarbo, there's some, it's kind of a mix of both. It's dark, but I wouldn't say it's like brooding, like intense. It's more like the poem. I would describe it as mischievous. And Scarbo, like Ondine, has 50 presets and 25 multis. So that kind of tells you how these instruments are alike and how they're different. They basically share all the same UI controls, but they just use very different tones and colors in each one. We are going to bundle these all together and put a discount on them. If you would like to purchase them as a collection, we will give you a discount on that. More to announce soon after Gibet comes out. So even though this does mark the end of our trilogy, we are still, you know, looking for that narrow lane for us to drive through of like, what do we want to do next in the synth world? If you guys have ideas of what you would like to hear from us in a synthesizer type series, then make sure to let us know. We love to hear what you guys are looking for. But it's really been a joy and an honor to work through this series. I feel like we've grown a lot as a company. I mean, we're still the same two-person company we were in the beginning, but I feel like we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about like what you guys want to, you know, do with these instruments. And we're just so glad that you've been along for the ride with us. You can check out all three of these instruments. We have walkthroughs, demos, all the information that you would need, teletoneaudio.com.